Interacting with minor clients presents great challenges for human services professionals, including social workers and healthcare providers. According to Vassar, the challenges are greater in the context of consent and confidentiality when providing the necessary services. The minor population is difficult to engage with because of the definitional and conceptual differences that characterize transitioning between adulthood and childhood. Many young clients may present the level of maturity required to make informed decisions about required services, but confidentiality and consent rights are mostly reserved for their caregivers. Legislations provide guidelines that assist human services professionals in determining whether minors can require confidentiality in certain instances. Mastroianni and colleagues observe that minors' consent and confidentiality issues provide additional areas of interest, including whether or not adolescents can consent to or refuse treatment. The dilemmas resulting from consent and confidentiality-related mandate carefully examining the interaction between legal and ethical requirements to reduce the susceptibility to malpractice suits in human services practice. Ethics protects the duty to uphold confidentiality and facilitate informed consent. Taze and Rental maintain that human services professionals must respect their clients' privacy by using the information gathered through established therapeutic relationships in a responsible fashion. All the information gathered based on the purpose of services requested by the client is categorized as confidential. Clients maintain openness, believing that the involved professionals safeguard all provided information. This phenomenon accounts for the significance of full disclosure in professional communication. Legislations do not provide a known uniform age where human services professionals must get parental consent when working with minors. According to Olendik and colleagues, this phenomenon implies that professionals should make ethically sound judgments based on the maturity and understanding of involved children. Professionals should be aware of all the legislative requirements that affect informed consent because they differ from one profession to another and one jurisdiction to the next. Henriksen and Fouché observed that gathering confidential information should be accompanied by assessing a minor's capacity to provide consent independently. Discussions with minors determine whether confidentiality is upheld or not. Standard practice requires human services professionals to obtain consent from minors' guardians for adherence to more complex interaction requirements, such as autonomy and self-determination. Minors, especially adolescents, tend to be secretive and might require the restriction of shared information from parental access. This requirement is particularly common in providing mental health and sexual-related services. Adherence to self-determination and autonomy mandates human services professionals to extend adult privileges to minors who present the capacity to make informed decisions independently. However, the likelihood of adverse interaction events, such as self-harm in mental health cases or requiring an abortion in the provision of sexual-related services, inform the standard practice of obtaining parental consent during interactions with minors as outlined by Olendik and colleagues. This phenomenon reduces the likelihood of ethical and legal dilemmas. Minors who are deemed incapable of independently providing consent are referred to human services professionals based on a single parent's permissions. Vassar posits that the prevalence of single-parent families in modern societies has informed legislation changes to allow consent from one parent. The other parent who could have lesser parental rights or responsibilities may not be aware of the child's involvement in human health services. The referral stage could present dilemmas linked to the scope of confidentiality concerning the other non-referring parent. The other parent could request follow-ups with provided services, which might be against the will of the referring parent. All parents have some degree of responsibility for their children. This responsibility is exercised when one parent is unable to pay for professional services as presented by Mastroianni and colleagues. However, it is difficult or impossible for the non-referring parents to be financially liable for services whose information was restricted from them. Differences associated with restricting confidential information from separated parents could result in dilemmas in human services practice. Taze and Rental argue that the professionals must access all the necessary court orders that determine the scope of responsibilities and requirements for both parents. The orders could also stipulate the relevant regulations that define the provision of human health services. Accessing court orders lengthens processes that inform the provision of underlying services but are fundamental for practice efficiency. Human services professionals should also seek legal advice. Working with minors whose parents are estranged further complicates confidentiality practice requirements. Professionals should always understand that the children are their clients, as opposed to their parents. Thus, best interest principles must be implemented with regard to confidentiality requirements in practice, as outlined by Olendik and colleagues. Considerations of unintended consequences must be outlined in situations where confidentiality requirements involve parental exclusion from professional minor interactions. For instance, adolescent minors could capitalize on parental differences in choosing the parent to involve in practice. Vasu explains that the consent principle informs confidentiality since it determines the authorization of information disclosure. Some parents refer their children to human services professionals without their consent. In such instances, professionals should determine the minor's eligibility for confidentiality and consent based on individual capacity. A logical extension of the consent principle common in human services practice encompasses minors having the right to refuse related services. Parental authority overrides involuntary views for children who lack the consent capability. Mastroianni and colleagues observe that the perception of human services being counterproductive from a professional perspective informs refusing any referrals. Some legal obligations, such as child protection or juvenile practice, limit the professional rights of professionals to refuse referrals. As mentioned above, minor clients are accorded the same privacy and confidentiality as adult clients. Human services in the context of children provide child-oriented environments founded on safety to promote all dimensions of wellness, as suggested by Tays and Renteln. This purpose is never extended into creating records to be used in legal proceedings because of the possibility of compromising full disclosure. A parental request to access their child's case record necessitates getting informed consent from the minor if they are deemed to have the capacity to give consent independently. This phenomenon might be an issue for parents since they feel that they make all the necessary referrals, and as such, they should be actively involved in decision-making processes. Mastroianni and colleagues explain that the parent-based issue is further compounded by the legal requirements of parental responsibility and contractual obligations that involve their children's wellness. In the case of non-referring parents, human services professionals should obtain consent from the referring parent and the minor before disclosing confidential information. Tays and Rentel maintain that professionals should disclose the minor's case information in adherence to the best interest principle in instances where the client cannot independently provide consent. Providing parents with a broad context of the progress is fundamental for involvement in underlying processes. Information on client progress is provided in summary reports, especially for legal proceedings when requested by solicitors. Court orders, warrants, and subpoenas mandate breach of minors' confidentiality requirements by granting lawful access to required information. These confidentiality exceptions define approaches taken by human services professionals in instances where minors threaten their safety and that of others. Vasu notes that the legal requirements to safeguard the community mandates breach of confidentiality, even when dealing with adult clients. Clear communication between the solicitor and human services professionals is fundamental to avoid unauthorized disclosure of confidential information, which undermines practice quality.